Hey everybody, Dankey here with part two of our look into this Washington Examiner article where in an interview Noam Chomsky accuses the anti-fascist movement of being a gift for the right. Um, and he says here, when confrontation shifts to the arena of violence, it is the toughest and most brutal who win, and we know who that is, said Chomsky, a professor emeritus of linguistics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. That's quite apart from the opportunity costs, the loss of opportunity for education, organizing, and serious and constructive activism. And to that, I say, why not both? There's no rule that says the left can't have education, organizing, serious and constructive activism, and oppose fascist marches on the streets with direct confrontation. There's no rule that says you have to either do one or do the other. You can do both, and so he's acting like and by uh, uh, directly confronting fascism, we're somehow like devoting all of our attention, all of our collective, leftist action towards that. And while that is, as any serious leftist in the United States would agree, the most pressing issue, there's also, uh, of course, other leftists doing their part. I'd like to count myself among them, doing education. There's others doing organizing and serious and constructive activism. So Noam Chomsky, I think, once again kind of goes back to my analogy of him being like an overprotective, overbearing father who he underestimates the strength of the left, and um, I am not sure if that's because he's been around the block so many times that he has sort of become jaded to the prospects of like a true proletarian revolution. Um, and I don't blame him. Because I mean, consider the time in which he has lived. He has lived to see pretty much the Soviet Union collapse and replaced by the new current global hegemony of globalized capitalism. And so half of his entire academic career has sort of been devoted, at least his political analysis anyway, has been devoted towards trying to figure out how do we pick up the pieces. And he had quite a bit of criticism towards the Soviet Union, but I think that once again sort of uh, goes into his misunderstanding of the sort of violent nature of the right and how uh, it's not the burden the burden of violence isn't instigated from the left. It's instigated from the right. The right is the one who supports the capitalist, oppressive, fascistic uh, policies that keep and maintain the class struggle we see in society. The proletarian revolution seeks to bring about peace through the establishment of a dictatorship of the proletariat. Yada yada yada. Um, but I mean, Chomsky doesn't. I guess he doesn't think we can do that by actually fighting. I don't know how he thinks the proletarian revolution is going to come about, because there's always going to be like fascism as a response to socialism. Uh, where you have a proletarian revolution, you'll probably have fascists there trying to fight it, especially in a country that has a history of like imperialism or nationalism or something like that. You're always going to have those far right fascist reactionary elements that anytime a legitimate proletarian revolution comes about, they will fight them. And so the left have to be prepared to fight. The left has to be prepared to do direct action, direct confrontation of fascists in the streets, because the fascists in and of themselves, their identity, uh, to quote, I think that Public Enemy #1 song, their identity by themselves causes violence. Um, it says the violence in Charlottesville ended Saturday when an alleged white supremacist drove a car into a crowd of anti-racism activists, not all of whom were Antifa activists. Uh, I would argue if you were there, you were pretty much an Antifa activist by association. In the same vein that everybody there on the protesting side against the taking down of the statue was uh, guilty by association with the fascists. They killed 32-year-old Heather Heyer and injured more than a dozen others. The driver has been charged with murder. On Tuesday, Trump shocked viewers of a press conference, including prominent members of his own party, by saying both sides deserve blame for violence. Critics said the president should single out white supremacists for scorn. Uh, there was a group on this side, you can call them the left, you can call them left, that came violently attacking the other group, Trump said on Saturday. So you can say what you want, but that's the way it is. Where Antifa fits into a historical context of progressive activism is not yet clear. Well, I mean, you can look at the anti-fascist movements in history. Look at Germany. Look at fascist Italy. Um, Wherever fascism props up, you see an anti-fascist movement come about in response. Unless there's just like a complete and absolute purging of the society, which is, typically what the fascists uh, resort to as a means of combating any kind of real anti-fascist action in their country. Uh, Observers see the increasingly prominent movement, members of which were mass arrested at Trump's inauguration after March that featured window smashing. Ooh, because the violence of the left is so destructive. Do you remember how many millions of people died in the butchery of Trump's when the Antifa hordes stormed Trump's inauguration? Perhaps one of the most emotionally charged moments for them, uh, in at least for the past few years, and they resorted to the extremely violent and terroristic act of window smashing. They smashed some windows that the glass could have cut somebody. Um, they could have missed and like hit a pedestrian or something. Uh, But I mean, that's pretty much you can pretty much say that that they shouldn't have done that because that just weaponized the right against them. They should have left that window intact, and they should have just stayed home. They should have just stayed home and probably just read some theory and didn't don't do anything when a fascist orange man-child clown is elected as president. Mark Lance, professor of justice and peace at Georgetown University, said the Antifa movement's rise is a clear response to more open fascist organizing. He says, I'm seeing more concrete, productive discussion between anti fascists and the others on the left these days than ever before in my life, Lance said. Because I think in the United States, there was just this sort of period where people assumed, okay, socialism's dead, uh, liberalism uh, is pretty much the future forever. It's the end of history, so we should just, be content with our lot in life. But then after 2008, and then seeing this sort of rise in reactionary fascist white supremacy, of course you're going to see the left begin to organize again, say snap themselves out of it, out of this sort of liberal hypnotism that they've been in for the past few decades, and they say, all right, fine, we are ready to discuss the proletarian revolution again. um, It's almost like when the Soviet Union dissolved, the left just got smacked in the face so hard it knocked them out, and they've just been unconscious until like right about now, at least in the West. You can also, say that the Arab Spring populist national revolts were cases of this being taken abroad. Um, let's see. He says there's reason to think that it will become integrated into an emerging coalition that includes Sanders supporters, Democratic Socialist dreamers, the movement of Black Lives, environmentalists, and Native American organizers. Yeah, I mean, uh, that's pretty much a natural alliance that will form. Um, And I mean, this is a great thing to happen. I'm not sure why Noam Chomsky seems to think like these actions of direct confrontation of fascism divide the left, because if anything, uh, it provides a sort of united front. People need something to rally behind, and God knows the Democratic Party isn't going to do jack shit besides just criticize Trump and say, "Ooh, he says bad, naughty words, Orange Man bad," and that's pretty much all they're going to say. Um, so to see uh, an emerging coalition including Sanders supporters, which are pretty much social democrats, democratic socialists, who which in the United States is social democracy. I think Uh, I think I said this in the past about Bernie Sanders. I think he's trying to use the term democratic socialism to sort of rebrand socialism in the West, because obviously we have this sort of boogeyman attitude towards socialism whenever it gets mentioned. It's sort of like a taboo thing uh, in the media, at least. So, dreamers, these are people whose countries were destabilized by American imperialism, and they were told as young children, "Oh, you can come here and live in the country, and we'll, give you citizenship and guarantee, you can stay here." And uh, it's the American dream. That's why they call them the Dreamers. And Trump is, of course, trying to deport them. Say the free ride's over, bitch. But of course, it's not a free ride. They've been here contributing to society just as any other citizen would. Um, the movement of Black Lives, of course, living in the Deep South, I see the prevalent white supremacy and racism in our culture, and in particularly around here. And it's people who equate Black Lives Matter with like a fascist movement and say that they're both the same. That is like the most liberal and peak privileged conversation I've ever heard. Uh, it's really like peak privilege. Uh, and I can imagine in the very same vein, like people back during the civil rights era saying, why are those people marching? Because uh, they are just being too rowdy, and uh, they are upsetting the apple cart, and Black Lives Matter is too confrontational. But as far as I'm concerned, they're not confrontational enough. I mean I can say that, but I'm a white person. A, I don't have the right to tell Black Lives Matter what to do, because that is a movement for Black people by Black people. All I can do as an ally and a supporter of Black Lives Matter is to sort of fight against the sort of false equivocation we always see leveled at them. Uh, I've had many conversations with right wingers and even liberals who say Black Lives Matter are just as bad, and that's just complete liberalism, complete bullshit. And obviously, they're not as bad. Obviously, um, and of course, environmentalists and Native American organizers. Uh, these two groups are kind of they share a very similar cause, and that Native American organizers, as we can see, like in the case of the Standing Rock protests, these were sovereign tribes whose land was once again being threatened by United States neo-colonialism and imperialism, and this just is the latest in the long history of the Native American genocide, which you can argue has sort of winded down, but it's never completely stopped. The conditions and the reservations across this country, the sheer amount of poverty is something that is completely ignored by the American media, and are the the way that Native Americans have been treated, and the way that they continue to be treated, and just sort of shoved to the side and marginalized, uh, is a real shame, and they have an extremely important role to play in educating the working class in terms of resistance, because these are people who have survived um, relentless onslaught of their way of life for generations now, and they have preserved uh, their languages, their customs, their ceremonial dances, and spiritual customs. And so, the fact that they survived against this sort of genocide, and they stand proud even in the tremendous poverty of the reserves, just shows the working class and the proletarian movement has uh, a lot to be inspired by. Their ability to stand strong and retain their honor in the in light of the horrors they have been subjected to. So um, it says. Reaching for American historical parallels for Antifa is difficult. Lance said he doesn't see a close historical reference in leftist groups that formed in the 1960s, like the Black Panthers or the Weather Underground, which conducted a bombing campaign aimed largely at damaging property. Both were primarily focused on government institutions, he said. There's some limited similarity to the Weather Underground, Chomsky said about the group that grew out of the anti-Vietnam War movement. He added, however, that weathermen differed not only in radically different contexts but also in tactics, almost always against property in intent at least. Um, let me sort of reread that. Okay, yeah. I don't know why I got confused reading that. Makes sense. By contrast, Antifa purports to be defensive, he said. Well, I mean, I kind of goes back to what I said in part one. Like, Antifa aren't the instigator of the violence. The instigator is always coming from the right, and the Antifa movement simply responds to that. Um, and then the last sentence of the article says, anti-fascism during the rise of Nazism in Germany is perhaps a better analogy for today's Antifa, said Chomsky, who had expressed alarm at Trump's remarks. He clarified that in Germany, left violence was hardly the problem. Yeah, yeah. I mean, nobody looks at the history of like the Weimar Republic and whines about how like the Spartacist uprising was too violent, um, because they're just completely slack-jawed at the horror of uh, what the monster of German fascism that came out of that. So it seems like Chomsky is sort of being too overprotective of the left. He doesn't really want us to I guess overextend ourselves or put too many of our eggs into the basket of like confronting fascism, because that would somehow lead us not to be able to focus on like organizing in more constructive ways. So there's always um, uh, the leftist movement is extremely diverse, and so there are always going to be different people doing different things at the same time. uh, I don't think you're ever going to like get into a situation where the left is just so preoccupied on attacking antifa, for example, that they like ignore something like uh, the dismantling of obamacare or something like that. I think the left is has uh, is equal in its indignation, but is also capable of attacking both those issues uh, through different means and in different ways, but nevertheless at the same time. So um, that is my sort of take on Chomsky's take on the uh, anti-fascist movement. I can sort of understand why he says the things and takes the position he does, but at the same time, I think he's sort of missing the forest for the trees when it comes to, the real purpose of the anti-fascist movement. So I would like to know your thoughts. Let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching.